So I'll just hit record. I'm gonna try, I guess, running Big Blue Button and Zoom at the same time to see
Wow.
if that can create
Wow.
some sort of useful interface. Um, so for now. Oh. Okay, so Roland's here now. I did create the separate Big Blue Button one, but we'll see. That was mostly if Stefan wanted to join today. For whatever reason, he just is opposed to using Zoom. But actually, Roland, had you been using Big Blue Button with the Howard Rheingold course? I guess that was something I wanted to also touch on today. Cause
yes, we use Big Blue Button, I believe. I will check it, but I think so.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm hosting my own Big Blue Button server, and I've integrated it with our Mattermost space. So technically it can be used, but we had some technical issues last week. I forget if it was this call or another one, where it does seem like Zoom is still a little more polished in terms of getting high bandwidth connectivity and audio troubles and all that stuff sorted out. But have your experiences with Big Blue Button recently been flawless, or I guess I'm curious.
Rather flawless.
Oh, okay. But I think Howard doesn't host his own server, right? He must pay for maybe the Big Blue Buttons team
So, yes.
hosted. Okay. Okay.
But I think a lot of the difficulty, Robert, is that we are just not individually practiced. I mean, you mentioned Big Blue Button, and I freeze. My soul shrivels at the thought of, another interface, another set of buttons, another set of parameters, another set of contingencies. I made that comment about skydiving in formation. You can only do it together when you can do it yourself. So. And the trouble is that most of us, I mean, I've spent more time on it than most, and I haven't got a handle on it at all yet. So what I saw was an enormous amount of individual dispersion rather than de facto a problem with the server system. Although obviously bigger server and run by Big Blue Button would be expected to work. So.
Yeah, actually, I was just chatting with, I think he's one of the either co-founder or primary developers for the Big Blue Button. I think his name is Fred Dixon on Skype just before this, because the one thing that's not so great about Big Blue Button is that, well, I like to put these recordings up on YouTube, and I guess however Big Blue Button records, it's kind of, it does its own custom stitching together of the screen shares and the webcams and the text chat, and it produces a really awesome sort of nicely scrollable artifact afterwards. But from what I can tell, you can't export that as like a YouTube thing. So I was just chatting with him sort of maybe 30 minutes ago about how I could maybe get at some of the video content and maybe stitch it together myself with some post-production video software.
You don't want to do that. No.
Yeah.
No, I really think if it doesn't sort of go click bang and end up with something that goes easily to something like YouTube or other curation, the of you having to sort it and chop it and, bound to be a problem. But
well, it's been a while since I've connected with Roland, so I guess there's a bunch of questions I have for him. Sort of, I joined the Augmented Collective Intelligence course from Howard Rheingold, but I fell behind and sort of I attended one call. I think the last live session, one of them, but other than that, I sort of fell behind and was wanting to re-go through some of those materials, maybe with a cohort here in the Open Learning Commons. But I'm curious how your experience was. Had you taken this course of Howard's before? Maybe.
Maybe lost sound somewhere, huh?
Yeah. Are you able to hear me, Roland? Well, maybe not. Depending on if Roland can hear me, we might have to switch to some other topic. Oh, are you trying to speak? I can't hear you for some reason.
Yeah, you're getting my sound, I think, Robert. You hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Michael. Weird.
I hear you.
Oh, I see Roland's back in the Big Blue Button side, so maybe his microphone's stolen by the other application. Say let's just use Zoom, although I would think I could hear. Oh. Roland is now in this room twice and in the Big Blue Button room once. Maybe I should just do a little screen share here since we're talking about Big Blue Button, but nobody's going to see it on this recording. So this is the tool. I think it defaults to having this sort of collaborative whiteboard up, but you can also, as a facilitator, bring in some slides, and then as you page through the slides, I think it works really well with PDFs. It actually uses those page changes as time-stamped segments within the recording, so that's kind of a nice feature. It has public chat, which is where I was sort of inviting. I don't know, it looks like Stefan isn't going to join, even though it's in the channel. But yeah, I was sort of invited Roland to join here. Can we hear you again? Maybe now, Roland. I don't know.
Yes, you can. I think.
Ah, okay, perfect. There we go. Did you hear my?
I was checking whether Howard was using Big Blue Button, and indeed it was all.
Oh, hold on a second. I think Michael's moving papers is pretty loud, so it.
I will mute my moving paper.
Yeah, I missed a piece of what you said, Roland. If you could say it again.
So Howard was using for the course. He was using Big Blue Button. I just checked it.
Ah, okay. Oh, it looks like Kiala is in the room now, so maybe. I guess using too many tools here, I can also message Kiala in our Mattermost. So what was your had you taken the augmented collective intelligence course before, Roland, and sort of
yes, I did.
Ah, okay. Was it
so
new, different?
A lot of the material was the same. We started out discussing Van Nieuwenbusch and Licklider and Engelbart, and so those foundational texts, and then it continued using social bookmarking such as Digo, and using mind maps. Primarily people used CMap. Well, not everyone was participating actively, but in the forums, well, I think about half of the participants were rather active anyway. And there was quite some blogging going on and discussion in the forums. They also used the wiki, which is a part of the social media classroom software Howard uses. We used the wiki to make a lexicon. So all that must sound familiar to those who participated previously in his courses. And what's happening now is that the course has been extended by 2 weeks Um, People are self-organizing now using the wiki, and they will experiment with all the tools such as social bookmarking and mind mapping and wikis and blogs in order to develop certain themes. It's the subjects they propose right now are a bit it's rather meta, or how do you say it? It's not very concrete, but well, we'll see.
Abstract.
Abstract, really. So we'll see where it goes. But there are, I guess, about 7 to 8 people interested in continuing the experience, and they will continue to use the social media classroom infrastructure. That's a bit the situation right now.
Cool. And
I did not yet. I did not really try to invite them over to open learning because I wanted to be sure what the best way would be to get them in, to avoid that they would be confronted with one closed gate after another, or complicated things to do in order to get where they should be at open learning.
sorry, I was distracted at a really inopportune moment. I was messaging Stefan. So if you could repeat that.
Yeah, I was just thinking about how that would be the best way to invite them over so they could just join here and participate in the open learning community.
Yeah, I feel a little weird to do that myself, given that I didn't actually participate that deeply in the course, though I had chatted with Howard briefly of just the idea that we might have our own little cohort and go through the open syllabus ourselves.
Yes.
So I started that conversation, but yeah, I too wanted to reach out to Howard sometime soon and sort of bounce some of those ideas off of him. So is your impression that they'd be open to such things, or?
Well, that was the last thing you said.
Do you think, or maybe you and Jim could consider that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I want to do it. I want to invite them over, but I just need to find the right protocol to do it. To say, well, here is the link, and you click on this link, and you will end up in our fabulous community, and we'll be there to welcome you. But it's not very clear to me which link that should be without having them just having all kinds of technical problems of how do I get in, and where is this thing really, and etc.
Yeah, actually, I would say recently it's I don't know. Yeah, it is a pretty emergent sort of self-organized space, and it looks like we might transition a little bit more focus onto discourse, which is actually what the people are already using within that course.
Yes.
So I don't know if is the intention to have that discourse be sort of a perpetual thing, or it was only supposed to be like a pop-up space to sort of.
No idea. I think it totally depends on the participants.
Okay.
And I think if we want to get them to use it more permanently, then we better not wait too long, because right now there is still a momentum. They're still actively engaged, and if we wait for too long, then fewer people will be left.
Okay. Well, maybe I don't know. My personal sort of bandwidth is going to get lower in the next month. I'm going on sort of a pretty long road trip journey, and then culminating at the decentralized web camp at the end in about a month's time. So, but I did recently seed and invite some new members in to talk about. There's a new channel called Engelbardians, and I'm going to be playing
Oh,
with
really?
Sam Rose, and also Stefan is in that channel already. Around, yeah, even looking at not just some of Howard's sort of open courseware type materials, but also a lot of the workshop materials that Douglas Engelbart left behind would be an interesting sort of cohort to go through those materials. And it sounds like Sam Hahn has actual hard copies of when he participated in them in person in like the mid 90s or something like that.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
so there's some interesting sort of energy there.
Well, I think if we make the link with Engelbart and the fact that well, actually, even though maybe you have not participated as deeply as you would have liked to, you did participate in all those previous courses. So, being Howard alumni, I think we're all entitled to invite them over and say, well, we are just continuing this exploration, this Engelbartian exploration. So that should be of interest, I think.
Cool. And actually, I hadn't followed that thread, but is there still an alumni forum somewhere, or really the only activity is now in this sort of the forum tied to this course?
Well, I think it's mainly in the course now. I don't think there is really an active alumni forum. There is also pedagogy. I think they're still working on the pedagogy handbook, and a number of those people involved there are also alumni. They could be contacted as well, I think.
Yeah, well, I noticed Kella asking some questions in the chat, and he's been one of my sort of collaborators in stewarding the Open Learning Commons so far. So maybe he could speak to some of his questions and also his perspective on sort of where we're going.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, I could chime in quick. Just noticing the timing of when we're able to invite more folks into the Open Learning Commons, and some of the challenge with that, having had it sort of start to be a place to invite folks, but not really clear how to participate. So I think it's just important that that's part of the context, that people know that we haven't really launched it yet in that way. And in the same way, some of the related questions around where the hosting is and what software is being used, and then especially what our strategy is for not having siloed data, or at least acknowledging the ways that data gets siloed, and creating ways to connect across the vast realms of data that exist already. And that feels like a good part of our inquiry. And this is my first time on a MetaCAugs call, so I know that that's part of the intent, is to sense make with a whole series of tools and be able to weave them together and keep tracking what's working and what's new and what we might create in the process. So happy to be here, and it's building the plane in the air kind of situation, I think.
Yeah, and multiple different planes, because I think I'm sort of thinking of OLC as more of an ecosystem. We're not going to sort of force on any cohort a suite of tools that they would use as like a little co-learning group. Actually, I think it was from the one and only Rheingold course I participated and finished in. At some point in the forum, I actually used this metaphor that we're co-piloting some sort of co-learning spaceship. So maybe there's a whole fleet of co-learning spaceships, and some of them are being built on the way down or up or wherever they're headed. But yeah, definitely the MetaCAugs cohort or team or call or whatever you want to consider this is more catered to the people that are a little more okay with the sort of cognitive overhead and ambiguity of each call, maybe using different tools and testing out different things and being on the frontier, I guess, is how Engelbart might have referred to it as. But yeah, that said, I don't know. We haven't exactly been playing with too many calls today, other than trying to do a recording or using Big Blue Button at the same time as Zoom. I'm realizing just for learning that I wasn't able to share my video stream to both spaces. So I might need like a second webcam or something like that if I actually wanted to sort of be a host in 2 spots at once. So likely, well, actually, maybe it's good that I'm I'm noticing somebody else, Lauren just joined. So actually, maybe I should end the Big Blue Button meeting, and therefore it won't be confusing. And then just give me 1 second to send Lauren a link. Yeah, for this call, because we didn't, or maybe for context, there used to be a MetaCAugs group that Roland was part of, and each week we would sort of be a little bit more deliberate through the interim period of the week to sort of do agenda building week to week. And then when we came to the call, we would either be doing a book club type discussion, or we would have some sort of plan for the week. Not that we would have to have that, like, so, but I would say for this call, we didn't do that. So it's kind of an emergent agenda. So feel free to sort of propose things. I'm just going to message Lauren here so she knows where to head or where we are. Actually, another thing, hi Lauren, sorry about the confusion with the Big Blue Button. Sort of, I was going to try and run 2 calls at once, but it really didn't work. So we've sort of consolidated down to this one space.
I'll be right back. I'll be right back. Okay.
Yeah. The other thing actually to mention is we've sort of been, and I've been thinking through this with David Ng, who I've been working closely with a lot recently. And actually I'm going to be presenting about Dig Life and the Open Learning Commons at the ISSS conference in Corvallis in, I think it's at the end of June. So that's part of this road trip that I was explaining. But so we're still fleshing out some of the stuff. It's getting a little bit more concrete, even though the intention is to have more of an open, loosely coupled ecosystem of, or suite of tools. But we're sort of looking at the discourse as being like a more open on the internet. You don't have to, like, you could stumble upon it through a Google search, and that would be Creative Commons content. And then the federated wiki that we're hosting is by default always Creative Commons as well. But that some of the other spaces, maybe CodeMD or maybe even the Mattermost, wouldn't be Creative Commons, given that it's kind of behind some sort of membership wall or something like that. But I don't know if that brings up any thoughts.
Yes, first of all, could you post the link again for the discourse group? I was focusing now on the Mattermost venue, but...
Yeah, so, well, a lot of this is going to get a lot, whoops, ignore that for a second, that one.
Okay.
A lot of this is going to get a lot more concrete because my project for the next week or 2 is to polish up the actual website. So if you delete the discuss off of the discuss.openlearning.cc, there will be, right now it's a template, but it will be sort of a landing page to point to the different tools that you can use within the Open Learning Commons, one of which is the forum. And yeah, over time we might direct more attention to the forum rather than the Mattermost, although I see the 2 tools, and then actually this was my intention from the beginning, that the 2 tools would sort of pair well together, where the Mattermost would be better for actual cohorts doing real-time coordination and sort of like maybe figuring out a time when to meet or sort of mentioning each other, where the discourse forum would be more for sort of evergreen, sort of long-lasting content that, yeah, is discoverable on the web and that sort of thing. And less synchronous, more asynchronous. So yeah, the other tools, given that the web page, the homepage doesn't yet link to them all, if you go to wiki.openlearning.cc, that's the federated wiki. And then there's actually a few other tools we use, but for now, we've left it as the DigLife links. So if you want to use the notepad.diglife.coop, that's a CodeMD tool, actually, which I think mentioned to Lauren that it's a collaborative sort of document editing space that you write Markdown in. And interestingly, the new openlearning.cc website is going to be built on Grav, which is actually a flat file CMS or content management system that also uses Markdown as how you create the content. So trying here and there as this thing emerges to make somewhat of a simplified sort of suite of tools that everyone can learn how to contribute to. And
so what we basically need, I think, is a kind of a landing page where people are being told, well, you have for asynchronous stuff this course, for synchronous stuff you have Mattermost, you have this video conferencing tool, the Blue Button or Zoom. Then you have the federated wiki that you can find that over there. That's the way it works. And some other tools I tend to forget. I don't know whether we will have any social bookmarking activity, for instance. So that it's all together and people immediately can orientate themselves.
Yeah, and actually, this is why I reached out to you, Roland, today, because I was like, I don't know if you've been seeing some of the app mentions, because a book club has started up, and in terms of social bookmarking, I sort of see Hypothesis in that vein. So we're going to start using Hypothesis together.
That would be that would be the, rather than Digo, we choose Hypothesis. Yes. Even though is it easy to use? I can imagine using it for commenting on for instance, one PDF file, but in order to have a collection of links to various web documents, I don't know whether it's the ideal tool, but maybe I don't use it enough to realize.
Yeah. Well, I've used it a bit, but not extensively. So I'm excited to be using it within a collaborative group. But yeah, you don't have to highlight and make annotations. You can just make page notes, and you can do hashtags. So I can see it being pretty easy for us to do something like a folksonomy or some sort of thing. And what's really nice about it is, at least when you're posting to the public, you can do searches within a hypothesis, and then if you're searching for multiple hashtags, it's almost like you're intersecting different hashtags, and then for each of those searches you can create custom RSS feeds. So that's interesting. And the other thing that's interesting is though I haven't used it much, we're hosting some sort of software or middleware so as to enable the subscription of RSS feeds to channels. So we could do some interesting things with making channels that are really just for collecting links, and not for maybe cohort coordination or discussion of topics. It would just be a link feed channel or something like that.
Yes.
Yeah. But Roland will recall in some of the prior iterations of some of these things, either on Slack or whatever, that the number of channels starts to balloon pretty quickly, and then that's another thing we need to figure out how to manage, is which in some ways the DigLife portal is pointing at a solution, but yeah, I don't know if everyone's played with that a little bit, but so yeah, I don't know, I feel like I'm excitedly talking, but taking up way too much space. I don't know, today's kind of an open-ended agenda, so
Robert, I don't think I've ever heard you talk so much.
Yeah, well, there's a reason this, truthfully, Open Learning Commons in many ways was an excuse for me to recreate a MetaCAugs space for myself, to re-invite people I was playing with prior to come back to play again. So, and actually I mentioned to Roland that I found, well, Roland's a journalist, and I met somebody in Toronto who's at the intersection of VR and journalism, and Roland kind of jokingly said that he's kind of behind the times. He needs to get on the augmented reality. So that's the aug part of the MetaCAugs.
Yeah, so just joking, of course. Look into his VR stuff. I just bought this Quest, so I'm still very much into VR stuff. The successor to the Oculus Go, the Oculus Quest. Of course, it's part of the evil empire of Facebook. I think it's unfortunate, but it's just like that. But still, it's a very nice tool. It's really it's a good thing I think to get gain traction for a wider audience and trying out VR. This being said, of course, it is true that people are very having high expectations for all things augmented reality also.
Yeah, I've only played with it a bit, and my coolest experience was actually last year at the Games for Change festival, or I forget how it's referred to. There was a game called Tree, where you put on the headset and you hold the sort of hand dongles or whatever they're called, and you embody a tree that's sprouting from a seed up out of the ground, and they actually spritz kind of like soil smell in your face, and then as you're growing, you sort of can move your branches around and they'll blow wind on you, and then so it's a really cool experience.
Yeah, I had a similar experience in France with also with a tree, and then it starts raining and you're holding the tree, which you become part of it, and you also have a backpack which starts to move, to live in your bag, and so you really get the impression that you're actually a living tree enjoying the rain. So yeah, these are nice features, but I think that the real interesting moment will come when we'll be able to work effortlessly in those spaces, which is not yet the case. It's very simple. You should be able to write and read easily, and for tools such as the Oculus Quest, it's just not yet, the resolution is not yet there to do that effortlessly. And it's still too much of a burden to wear those headsets for more than an hour. So they still have some way to go, of course, but the whole idea behind it is fascinating.
Yeah, well, I shared a link of something that Connor Turland created. I think I might have mentioned it on prior calls. It's more of a prototype, and it appears to not be working, but it's really just, it's called the Matrix Cafe, and it's a virtual space that you can drop into. You don't need a VR headset, but it gives you that sort of feel. But instead of walking around like a first-person shooter with a gun or something, you're literally just walking around as your webcam as like a big billboard in the space. And so you can use the keys on your keyboard to like turn and rotate and move around, and it actually has proximal sound. So as you move around, like other people's audio as they're speaking, if you're further away from them, they sound off in the distance. So it's more just the first of a making of a new sort of space to play in. But actually, I'll share a video that he sort of based it off of a VR experience that he had seen a coder using, that uses this 3JS thing, which is a 3D web-based sort of JavaScript library for doing, basically creating this environment. But what the coder was doing is he had a virtual screen in this 3D environment, maybe with a VR headset on, and he was using that screen as if it was his monitor and typing code in, but the code was generating 3D objects in the world. So he could like say something like, give me a cube of this size, and then all of a sudden it appears in the world. And then, so yeah, we've spent a little bit of time imagining how we could all enter into such a space, but bring with us our sort of 3D virtual objects that we design ourselves and we sort of walk around with, maybe. And so yeah.
Well, one of the interesting things of the Oculus Quest, it looks as if you actually there are 4 wide-angle cameras here. And so these are pass-through cameras. So when I wear it, I can actually see my environment in a kind of a blurry white and black or grayscale image. And I can, then the tool invites me to make a playing field, which stays there. So actually it already allows me to go from virtual reality to augmented reality and back again, which is, I think, which will be developed much further the coming years. But it's interesting to see that it's already basically part of what's available right now.
Yeah, I don't. Obviously, you follow this space a lot more. I was actually just recently looking at. I don't know. Is the Oculus Rift S better than the Quest, or the Quest is newer?
Well, the Quest, I think, as far as resolution is concerned, is better than the ancient Rift, and the S version, which still is linked to a PC, is still better than the Quest. That's a bit a high-end product of Oculus right now, the S. But I think for most people using it's just far easier to use the Quest. Because you don't need external sensors, you don't need a gaming PC, you don't need those stuff. You just have to you start using it using your phone, your smartphone, and then everything is inside the headset. And the important games which are really making the difference these days, such as Beat Saber or Super Hot, for instance, you can play those things perfectly using the Quest.
I found the video I was talking about. So
yeah, Firefox WebVR is also an interesting project.
And I might have missed it, but did you say the Rift S has the pass-through cameras as well, or that's only on the Quest?
I don't own a S. I stopped. I invested enough having the Rift and the Quest, and I did not see why I should also buy the successor for the Rift. So I'm not sure whether they have a pass-through camera. I guess they have it, but I'm not totally sure.
Okay, well, I'll stop sharing now that I shared the link as well if you're interested in that video, but I think it gives a sense of it. Yeah, I don't know. Speaking of games for change and VR in conversational spaces, I think that's where Lauren and I have sort of on some recent calls sort of playfully danced around some potential games, conversational games, and it would be interesting, to have them in like a VR augmented space or something like that.
Hi, Roland. I just wanted to introduce myself. I heard you were amazing. So nice to meet you. And where are you based?
I'm based in I work in Brussels, in Belgium, and I live in Antwerp, also in Belgium. And I'm a journalist for a business newspaper here, and I'm a digital news manager and also a columnist writing about technology and society. And so I am one of the Harvard alumni because I was very interested in everything virtual regarding virtual communities and online collaboration, online peer-to-peer education, stuff like that. So I always enjoyed his courses, and that's the way I also met Robert. And then a certain moment, we started reading together a book and meeting every week, reading a chapter or discussing some points and making notes, even in Note MD, I guess. Trying to use GitHub also, not for coding, but GitHub for trying to write stuff collaboratively, which proved to be a bit difficult because it takes some learning curve to learn the version control and stuff like that. And people who are not wanting to invest too much time into that, they just don't do it. And then you end up with two people using GitHub, and the rest is more or less observing what you're doing, which is not ideal. So I'm still looking, in fact, for kind of a more mainstream or a more dumbed down version of GitHub for collaborative texts, for instance.
Have you played much with the CodeMD, aka Notepad, on the DigLife space, Roland?
On the DigLife space, I used it to make this kind of proposal for a massive open course. So then I used it again, and I used it also while we were reading the book, Friedman's book. I used it, I believe, in that context, yes, and also for the DigLife stuff. Not very much, but well, it's nice to use the Markdown facilities. But it was meant to be, once again, it's always this, and I think that's one of the topics we'll discuss during the extension of the Harvard course, is how do you get people to actually collaborate? Because you can have a tool, it can be this Node MD stuff, or it can be another wiki tool, but then you see again and again how people hesitate to actually make a kind of a collective text. They shy away from it, it seems. Once you start using it and you make your text, then people are very respectful and they won't touch it. Maybe they will comment on it in the forum, but they won't actually change it, which defeats the purpose, of course, of the wiki. So there must be some methodology or a pedagogy to seduce people to actually use those tools like they are meant to.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have a point there. There's definitely about seduction, and it has to be so fun that people they can't keep away.
Yeah. So we were thinking about discussing at a certain point gamification for Howard's course, and say, well, maybe people should, but it easily, if people are a little bit older like me, they're very, it's difficult to talk about gamification without those people starting to say, well, it's a bit silly, isn't it? Becoming a guru or attaining a higher level because you participated in the wiki or because you had this nice comment on the blog. So they think it's a bit childish, I believe. So it's not that self-evident to use gamification in a way that it really appeals to all kinds of people, not only to younger people.
Well, what you just said made me think that, yeah, that group's already really resonant with the Open Learning Commons space. Recently, I re-sparked back up well, I mentioned Games for Change earlier. I resparked back up collaborations with Mariette, who both of you might have met. And we have a game design channel where we are talking about such things as gamification and game design. And there's a few papers that I've read on this concept of meaningful gamification. So it takes it, the point is to take it beyond these leaderboards and badges and these like trivial things for games, and like make the games meaningful. And that's, I think, where we're sort of getting at with conversational games, is if we're talking about important things, it doesn't matter if you have like the points and the tokens and the badges and all these leaderboard stuff is maybe it's a little bit of a catalyst or something, but it's not the actual point of the game. The game is more meaningful, and it brings deeper meaning to the people's lives who are participating.
Yes. Yeah.
Or I think, all this like I think even like gamification has been like, it always seems to be about points, and the games are never fun. When it's supposed to be like gamified, they're never fun. So I think it's really like a question of how do we actually have fun? How do we make things fun? And I think one way of making things fun is always to create spaces where people can just do crazy stuff, and they're actually resources. So you build up these little resource halls where just like a bunch of stuff laying around that people can actually like pick up and do stuff with. And then they'll be attracted to that space because they have some kind of freedom.
Yes.
And just to think, even with conversations, I think that the conversations that are on YouTube, or that you're kind of allowed to have, or the conversations you want to push out to people, sometimes like they're actually not all that interesting. And I'm so interested in exploring in what are the conversations like that are like encrypted conversations that you kind of like hide from people instead of the stuff that you put on YouTube. Because whenever I talk on YouTube, if I'm in the GCC or something, and I say very little, because I don't want to reveal too much about myself or say something crazy, because I can very easily say something crazy, and then it's like, oh God, I just said that on the internet.
Well, I would say I'm recording this, but I normally, if the
You're
calls,
recording this and you will use this against us.
yeah,
I know. Yes.
no, but the sort of always something I should maybe start every call with, although it's kind of hard because people come and go, and then I got to say the same thing 40 times. But that if there's anything you don't want on the recording, just let me know. It's not like it's not immediately being automatically uploaded. Like, for example, on one prior call, Charles Blass was screen sharing and showed a map of his that basically had all of his passwords on it. So I didn't just upload that. I did some post processing and edited it. So actually, and it was no passwords were shown, but actually Stefan, who was one of the ones, I don't even know if I'm saying the name right. We only met once so far.
Yeah.
But he's sort of been participating through consuming some of these videos that a certain group of people will actually watch, even though they're seemingly long and not sort of sustained interesting bits to it. But he had mentioned that I guess he saw a link also that Charles had shared, and sort of mentioned it to Charles, like, hey, did you know you shared this? And then Charles was able to, it was a Google Doc, so he was able to like undo the permissions on it in some way. But yeah, in terms of augmentation, a practice that Stefan sort of modeled is that when you have things uploaded to YouTube, you can timestamp different segments of the video, and so therefore we can hashtag and chop up and point at different segments. So yeah, it could almost be like a collaborative sort of tagging, and then we can almost use those tags to go back and pull out pieces of actual, like pull out the nuggets from the call and say, this was a wonderful part discussing this or that or something like that.
I think that if we had, if we paired up our calls, these kind of like heavy meta calls with like artsy production teams who would take these like 2-hour, like impossible, like they're so long, and I find them fascinating. But what would it be like if some like artsy little crew who was like experts in movie production changed our meetings that lasted 2 hours into like 30-second commercials, and you could digest the meetings, like 100 meetings in just a few hours from all the groups that were going around. That would be like an amazing kind of intelligence project that would be fascinating to watch.
Well, I have two thoughts towards that. One, I actually have a sort of emerging personal practice of sort of taking timestamped and hashtag notes as I go. So it's almost like a harvest as you go, rather than, oh, now I got to rewatch or re-participate in this 3-hour thing afterwards. And I think if we had,
that's what I do. Show me your, like, what you're doing.
Well, I can definitely, well, it's kind of an emerging practice. It's not something I can teach yet, but I think it fits into the Howard Rheingold sort of mode of, as we're doing these co-learning groups, different people can be playing different roles, and that really, if we get good at this together, we can synergize with each other and learn each other's sort of like preferred mode of participation. Or yeah, maybe multiple people could be doing this sort of hashtag timestamp note taking. So I sort of think,
because I know, on a Zoom call, I know you can type stuff into the text file that comes out as a separate file. Yeah. And maybe we can start a practice where like whole groups will be noting things, either like maybe their personal thing, like, oh, I love that, what was just said, but they could indicate that so that whoever was doing the transcription could watch that and add that to their map or something like that. The thing that is all the stuff that they really loved, or maybe we could also tag videos using a common ontology, and tagging conflict or something like the empathy, or kind of making our own neural networks by just creating a practice of like noticing when things were happening.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we're also, we think we've like come, at least a little bit in terms of like how we're, doing meetings, transcribing them, sharing them, but it needs to be like faster and faster and shorter, and because it's taking too long still. We need some interns. We need some like 18-year-olds around, just like doing this stuff.
Well, in some way though, the sort of, actually I've been referring to it as peer-to-peer learning instead of just peer learning, given that there's this interesting overlap with new DWeb and P2P tech. But in the P2P world, there is, in some sense, there aren't sort of like alternate classes. It's kind of like everybody has full rights and responsibilities to participate in the sort of collaboration. Although, yeah, maybe for context for Roland, I put in the chat otter.ai. It's this really interesting tool that we've been playing with in different groups. And what's really nice about it is if you share your, well, one, with Zoom, you can export just the audio and dump it into Otter. But if you share all those recordings into a group space on there, which they have, what's really interesting is you can do a full text search of all the recordings you've ever done and find, so you can go back and do text queries based on the auto transcriptions. And you can actually, you can edit the transcriptions too if you really wanted to make them even more accurate than whatever the AI pumps out. But yeah, in terms of the personal practice that you asked, I realized recently, I think it would be useful to have two streams going on, say with a Zoom chat. So I put like a note stream, and I think it's useful to use the Zoom chat as a note stream because like taking notes of our own, because just kind of like reflecting back what's heard or what's said, because the chat that's saved with Zoom is already saved in sync with the video recording. So it's really easy to do kind of timestamps from there by subtracting the start time from the time at which a message was sent. And then that time difference is then the exact time that you can put on a YouTube video to say, hey, at this exact timestamp, this thing was said. So I've done some like spreadsheet magic in the past to sort of do those subtractions. But then, yeah, I think you would also want an alternative stream for having like sort of multiple parallel conversational spaces. So on the one and only live session I attended with the sort of Howard Rheingold's Augmented Collective Intelligence course, it actually got into this, talking about how, well, some people don't want any parallel conversations going on. They're an instructor. They want all eyes to the front. They want all the attention on whatever the one person's saying. Have your laptop down. Don't be looking at your screen. Don't be talking to anyone else. Where I'd say in this metacog space, I'm almost for the polar opposite to that, of like, hey, I can direct my attention seemingly wherever I please, or like in terms of open space technologies, or the law of mobility. Like if you're not liking the way one conversational space is going, it's totally cool to be a social butterfly and just go to the next breakout room and seed and cross-pollinate in that space.
I also think like you know, these Zoom calls, they really limit your body language, because a lot of what happens is you're sending signals to people. If we're talking in person, you're sending like 90% of the conversation is your body talking. And without that, like, I don't know, in all of these conversations, I feel like there's like 10% of my personality that's like in the Zoom call, and all the things that make me in person, like all the things that I do, kind of all the gifts that I have, like they don't ever show up on these calls. Like all the like snarky comments that are in my mind, they never show up. And like, what if we had to have a super layered calls where you could allow people to flirt on the calls by like having like little thought bubbles above their head, and you could subscribe to like one person's thought bubbles or another. So people who you were interested in like seeing what are their thoughts, you could see kind of like live what they were really thinking, because there's so much that's you're just kind of like waiting like this while like someone is like hogging the conversation or whatever. Then there could be so much more going on like there is in a real conversation. So
yeah, that's interesting. It reminds me a bit of virtual spaces such as Second Life, where you had often when you had a conference in Second Life, there was an audio stream, someone talking actually. Then you had the audience consisting out of avatars. Those avatars could respond in audio, or they could also respond in text chat. But they could also send instant messages, direct messages to each other. So you had at least 3 or maybe even 4 layers in conversations, and it was pretty hard to keep up with all the communication streams entering your screen. But that's fascinating, yes. It really allows one to have a very good idea of how things actually went, because you have access to the private spaces in people's heads, the stuff they are typing to you in private but not saying out loud, etc. It's an interesting way of, but well, the only thing is there you have, of course, only the audio stuff and the text medium and a bit of visual graphic stuff, because you're talking about avatars, but they're limited in their expression possibilities. At least they were very limited until a few years ago. So, yeah, I see what you mean there. I think and compared to all that, Zoom and Big Blue Button is still pretty narrow and shallow as a communication device.
I think that the common thread is that the more we can allow people to show up as their full selves, the better, because most of us, like the most talented, kind of brilliant people, have these like expansive selves that they're not really encouraged, they don't feel comfortable at exposing, because they're just like usually in most situations you have a super narrow range of what you can kind of reveal about yourself that people in the room are comfortable with. So you're, at least me, like, just, you want these people to feel comfortable. So you're just like, oh, here's a little bit of myself that you can handle right here. But, you know, I think if we gave people the opportunity to expand on that and just come as like their full selves, whatever that is, then people would be really, the most talented people would be super attracted to that space. And I don't know how you do that exactly, but I think by making the space kind of as crazy as possible, maybe, and just having it be.
Yeah, and still giving people the freedom to use all those expressive dimensions or not to, because I can imagine that there are people who are just not feeling very comfortable in maybe some people are rather happy that the expression possibilities are limited because they don't want to reveal as much about themselves. And that should be okay. If people say, well, I only want to reveal some very specific thoughts I have, but I don't want to reveal my personality, then, well, people should do that. And if someone else wants to reveal much more dimensions, then, well, okay, go for it. But it should be possible, yes.
Robert, I'd love to see, you know, in our meeting on Saturday, you talked about gamifying social betting by Trello. And I was wondering, now that we have some time, could you just show me what that might look like? Like, how could we visualize that?
Sure. Actually, I haven't. I've kind of gone in and out of using Trello, and yeah, I guess this relates back in a way to what Roland was saying earlier about GitHub, because in some senses you can use GitHub as a Kanban board because you can use the issues as tasks, and then they have a project thing, and you can move those issues around. But Trello has some interesting affordances because, hold on. I'll pull up something where I can maybe. Oh, okay. Well, here. It's the old MetaCAugs Trello. We were playing with this probably a year and a half ago.
Yes.
Hold on a second. I don't know if this will actually work because what I was proposing might require a plugin. Hey, look, there's Roland and Ted. I don't see Charles, but he would have been around at this time.
Do you have any views about that? Because I don't see him anymore on social.
I don't know. I actually I think at some point I saw him on what's that Slack type thing? I think it's called Discord, but it's more for gamers. It did some sort of automated social networking on there, and I saw he was using that, and that's the only place recently that I tried to reach out to see. But no, I haven't heard from Ted. Okay, so this is an old agenda. Actually, I was thinking, so I guess this is directly in line with what you're asking. I was thinking Trello could be used as like a dynamic agenda voting thing for maybe something like an open space. So given that this is super old, I won't feel bad about moving cards around. But
Okay.
So you can move cards around. You can open the cards, and let's see, get power-ups. I think there's a voting power-up. Yeah, voting. There you go. So give the power to people and now use users to vote. So, oh, okay. Well, I've reached the power-up limit. I don't pay for Trello, but hold on. Maybe I can turn off some power-ups. Unlock more. Oh, wait. Voting's on then. It's just I can't add any more after voting.
Okay.
So anybody that's, I don't know how you vote. Oh, there it is, vote. So I just voted on that one, and you can see on the outside that it now has 1 vote. So if Roland hopped on to this, he'd be able to vote. And then, yeah, that was basically the start of the idea I had, that you could use this as like a way to shuffle cards around, order and prioritize them, and then, yeah, use voting so as to be able to sort of bet in a way. It's not exactly betting, but yeah, I don't know. There might be. Let's see if I go. This might have some options, because it would be interesting if.
Just to give you a little bit background, I've been introducing the concept of social betting, which is like a prediction market, like a social prediction market, using kind of like these financial ideas on betting on futures to the social realm, where you're betting on the outcome of like a social connection that you're making, which is sort of fascinating and super dangerous. So I've just been trying to spark discussions on this subject to see how we could get it going to kind of make visible the network weavers and to reward connections made in a social network, and to kind of see who are the people with kind of like social power, and the people who, I mean, I don't know. I think that I wonder sometimes too if the people who seem like they're super socially smart and emotionally intelligent, are they actually? And who is actually making the best connections? Because you might not know that. Maybe it's different than what it actually seems. Maybe some people kind of build themselves as emotionally intelligent, but their connections don't really amount to anything, where other people are just quiet and do things kind of
in the background.
Yeah. Like I always think like Robert, I somehow feel like he's always kind of like network weaving, but that's not always visible,
Yeah, and maybe I've realized that that's something I do myself, and maybe transforming a little bit to like seeing that as an actual, I don't know, skill or service or something like that. And so that's part of why I'm doing this road trippy thing I'm doing, is that growing up I was like really, really shy and really, really like I would never be on a call like this. So at some point life changed, and I sort of got much more interested in conversational spaces and actually sharing internal thoughts and being a little bit more extroverted.
Can you tell us something more about your road trip?
Well, it's sort of emerging, but the seed of it started with wanting to attend DWeb Camp, which is kind of like the Decentralized Web Summit of last year, except for it's a little less I've heard, I don't know how this term goes over with some, but like sage on a stage type thing, where in this case it's more closer to something like Burning Man, and you actually go to camp out and play with people with these tools. So I've met some people in the Toronto area in a group called TUE Mesh or Toronto Mesh, and they're actually going to help set up a mesh network. So the camp is going to be properly connected to the internet, but we're also going to intentionally disconnect and play only on a mesh network so as to sort of see and feel what it truly is like to be sort of fully peer-to-peer with some of these apps that everybody's talking about. Or not everybody, but anyway, so the road trip is going to start from Montreal, and I'm going to deliver a car from Montreal down to LA, like basically across the states, and then I'm sort of, so that's the skeleton, and I'm sort of fitting in visits to friends and people I've met on the internet into that road trip. And then once I get to LA, I'm flying up to Corvallis, where this International Society of the System Sciences conference is going on, and with David Ing, I'll be helping to present about Digital Life Collective, Open Learning Commons as one workshop. Then the second one is on federated wiki and pattern language. So that's sort of get people onto the tools, because we have FedWiki and we have ideas about how to do collaborative writing and pattern language development. I'd say David probably has a clearer view on that end of it. And Ward Cunningham's attending that conference as well. So he's at the center of sort of pattern languagey stuff too. And then the third workshop is on David's open research project, which actually is part of the Open Learning Commons, and it's called Systems Changes. Both intentionally plural, because he sees there's no one system change to make. So it's going to be multiple changes to multiple systems, and it's the complexity that goes with that. So looking very deeply at what system science and has to say, and has like deep research on that. And then, yeah, from there, I don't know. I'm still being fleshed out, but I'm going back down to south of San Francisco to attend DWeb Camp. So this is all sort of in about a week's time. I won't be hosting this call very likely, and I'll be driving a car.
Wow.
That seems very nice. Will you visit Howard?
Howard.
You could do it.
Yeah, I should. Actually, I should have done it last DWeb Summit, because I was out near San Francisco. I went to the Internet Archive, and actually I stayed with someone named Jean Russell on her houseboat, and I think she literally said like, Howard just lives over the hill or something like that. And I don't know, I didn't have
a houseboat?
I did. I don't know. I think I don't know what this state of that is or what's changed, but yeah, at the time, that's where I stayed briefly at last year.
So how will we get organized while you are on the road? Will you be able to attend to some meetings, or will it be very difficult for them?
Well, I won't be able to record in the way that I do, and actually I won't be able to probably do these note-taking practice, which I haven't been doing on this call, but I could sort of, I've done on other calls, so I could demo, but I definitely won't be taking notes while driving. But I intend to get a SIM card with some sort of US carrier, and I can be on calls. But I've done that here in Toronto. It's kind of interesting, like mount my smartphone to the car and just sort of listen in and contribute in small ways.
Yeah,
while driving.
And we'll have the book club. I don't know where the reading practice is for now.
Well, actually, my reading practice, I'd say, is horrible. I have a much better sort of audiobook and ebook, or audiobook and podcast practice, but and that'll work more nicely while driving. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe in some ways, pushing for this book club thing is me just once again trying to get more deliberate about reading actual hard copy books and moving a little slower in that realm of like must read type material that don't exist as podcasts or audiobooks. And I've heard, I don't know, I think I'm guilty of being too far on the like new end of the media spectrum and like always following the new stuff rather than going back to the really great stuff in the past, which is just as relevant now as it's ever been, I would assume, in many cases.
Yeah, but it seems it's a pretty interesting book which Bowen sent his colleagues present. So I intend to read it anyway, and so I guess we can meet on a weekly basis and have brief discussions about each and every chapter of the book.
Yeah, and actually, I was going to ask you earlier on this call, Roland, if you feel free to put your ideas into that book club channel about how we could format this thing. I don't know, maybe everything I do is sort of self-organized, so hopefully if I'm not there, it's still meetings still happen. But yeah, some different people have pitched some ideas about how we might augment the reading. Actually, Lauren herself pitched the idea that we could break all the chapters down and each read an individual chapter and summarize those chapters, and then somebody could just read the summaries. That was sort of one idea.
That's more or less what we did the previous installment of the book club. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I'm interested in sort of actually reading the whole thing myself and annotating as I go.
Yes.
And I know Joachim, who you might have met from Dig Life, he's put up a CodeMD note with all the chapter headings as a means to sort of doing maybe some collaborative writing under the chapter headings.
Yes, that would be a nice idea.
So yeah,
it's the most hilarious book club.
Well,
Yeah.
I forget what Stefan called it. Was it like the Hyper Book Club or something like that? Because it's like a hypermedia centric.
Yeah.
And I'm sure once I upload this, well, technically the Open Learning Commons has a YouTube channel. There's only a couple of videos on there, but I'm sure, given that unfortunately I sort of excluded Stefan by choosing to use Zoom today, but he has a good practice of going and watching the videos afterwards and doing that timestamp notes that I was talking about. So I'm sure he'll have something to say to most of this. We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Very well.
Yeah. Well, we're 20 minutes over time, so sorry about that, but hopefully.
Lots of things to discuss. So.
Yeah.
Robert, do you know my Doug Engelbart story?
No, I don't.
This is how I got into the game.
Oh, okay.
Super short story.
Yeah,
I was in the tech transform, some kind of conference in San Francisco in the fall. And so I met this super interesting older woman. She was like 70 something. And we just happened to be sitting next to each other, eating our salads from the conference. And she was telling me about she was writing a book on weight loss and how it was connected to some, brain stuff. And so she just starts talking about the salon that she used to host. And she did it once a month for years on end. She did it at her house. And just, she lived in Palo Alto and just invited, her friends. And she said if she wasn't there, she would, call a friend and have her, give her key so she would open up. So she would always be there and just kept the space open. So it's kind of interesting, like out of that space came some pretty heavy hitters like Van Cerf and Doug Engelbart and among others. And so she just told me that story and she was like, oh, you should check out Doug Engelbart's work. And so I just kind of like, after I heard that story, that's when I started my Saturday call. I was like, you know what? I can actually do that. I've done that before, just kind of like been a salon hoster and just like, whenever I invite people together, it's always super interesting and there always some like sparks that fly. So I just decided to hold open a space, and which I'm committed to just, doing over a period of time just to see what happens. Yeah, that's my Doug Engelbart story.
That's nice. It's a bit like the Enlightenment salons in Paris, of course. And the nice thing is that you can create this also online. That you can have a kind of it's okay. Some dimensions will be lacking, but it's on the other hand you can invite people all over the world. So that's a bit what we try to do with the book club. Okay,
Well,
Robert,
I shared one last link. No problem. This has been one of the better. I don't know. Sometimes the self-organized emergentness doesn't make for the best of calls, but this one was really good, at least from my perspective. I shared one last link. You were talking about salons, and actually, I was thinking about participating in this one that's hosted by Ben Roberts. It's less of a traditional salon, and I actually haven't read the whole link, but he invited me to participate.
Like Charles.
Oh, okay. He invited me to participate in a sort of mobile, nomadic way in this thing he's hosting himself, which is kind of like a world cafe, but his sort of twist on it, and yeah, online. So just something cool to look at. Conferenceweaving.com. Actually, I haven't deleted this particular event off the end of the URL, so even conferenceweaving.com sounds like an interesting one to me. But yeah, I'll end it there, and we can both we can all explore that afterwards.
All
and
right.
I'll link these notes into the recording, so they'll be somewhat time stamped as well.
Okay, great.
Awesome.
Thanks a lot.
Okay.
You guys.
Bye-bye.
It was really nice meeting you, Lauren.
Nice meeting you too.
Yeah.
Bye, Roland.